on a subject that deals both with foreign policy as well as domestic policy. You were in a discussion on trade matters and made the following quote: "A president's job is to create jobs, not export them." The current president has apparently done both because our overall unemployment rate has not soared. It's not wonderful. And not all new jobs are at the retail counter. In this particular community, for example, there are quite a few high-tech optics jobs, bearings jobs, and such. But there is dislocation in the economy. But just getting to what you would do as president, how would you act on this particular observation that the job of the president is to create jobs, not export them?
By enforcing trade agreement, which we don't do. Under WTO, even though it's only about 2% of the toys that come into the country, we have the power to shut down those companies who are exporting those toys to us. Boom, bang. We haven't done a thing. Why haven't we done a thing? If this were France or Israel or Poland who are exporting, we'd have shut it down yesterday. Why aren't we shutting it down? We're not shutting it down because American industry has invested significant amounts of capital in China. You shut down these very people, you're shutting down American stockholders at the expense of American citizens. So this has become a circumstance where not only with regard to China, but with regard to almost all our trade agreements, including with Korea. You're not allowed under the WTO to insist that if you're going to invest this new optic company, somebody steals your patent like they have done in South Korea, you lose in the South Korean courts. Instead of this Commerce Department weighing in on your side, the advice you get is, why don't you form a partnership in Korea? You can make a whole hell of a lot more money. And you now have 20 or 40 or 200 or 400 jobs in Korea doing this new high-tech job. I would enforce the agreements. If you want to play on the world scene, you should have to abide by it. I would call another Plaza conference like it called in the late 80s when the monetary policy of the world was in a tither. You have the Chinese manipulating their currency with a 40% advantage for us. We do nothing about it. We do nothing about it. Why don't we do anything about it? Again, because A, we owe them $1 trillion for financing this outrageous tax cuts we have and funding the war, because we won't fund it ourselves. That's why we owe them $1 trillion. And they're able now to threaten they won't buy T-bills in the next offering if we get tough with them.
Well, that's true for trade. It would be true for Taiwan.
No, it is.
We have no leverage if they've got $1 trillion about it.
Well,
they could dump dollars.
That's exactly right. But one of the things we have to be willing to understand, we have to be prepared to take some chances. They need our market a lot more than we need them to buy our T-bills. A lot more. And why don't we get tough? I come from the corporate state of America. That's why we don't get tough. Because what happens? It implicates a significant number of those companies. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a big problem. Why don't we enforce agreements whereby the piracy that's going on in China, without their willingness to in fact take on the moderate steps we require of every other European nation and the EU with regard to piracy of intellectual property? We don't do anything. We don't do anything. Part of the reason is because corporate America says, hey, wait a minute now. You remember the old joke, why does Willie Sutton rob banks? That's where the money is. Why do American corporations put up with this banditry? Because there's 1 billion people that have access to a market with. That's why. And it's detrimental to the United States of America. It is very, very useful to the companies in question. But the truth of the matter is that most of the trade problems we have, the trade agreements we have that are, quote, causing us problems to the extent they are, I have, if you look at my record, I'm essentially what used to be called a free trader. But the fact of the matter is, I'm really a fair trader. The reason why I haven't voted for a single trade agreement under this administration is they never enforce. They always yield to the corporate interest. They never enforce, legitimately enforce. Like I said, little tiny example. Can you imagine us not insisting that France stopped sending those 2% of the toys to us until we sent inspectors, which we're allowed to do, into their plants and verified that they are proceeding in line with the World Trade Organization requirements? The Russians tried this with us. They embargo. I come from a peninsula in the Middle Atlantic and South, Delmarva Peninsula. It's a $9 billion agriculture industry. They embargoed chickens. The administration would do nothing. So as chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, I said, I want to make it real clear to you. I called the foreign minister and the ambassador of Russia. You want Jackson Bannock lifted? You want a WTO status? You got to go through me. You disembargo chickens, or I promise you it's not happening. 10 days later, guess what? Delaware chickens were going into Russia. But why are we afraid of these guys?
Let me ask
Why are we afraid of, and I don't mean doing it unfairly, just enforce the same rules applied to us.
But just so we're no great fans of the current administration here, but some of the legislation that aggrieves some people in the political stage, NAFTA, for example, originated in a prior administration.
It doesn't aggrieve me. See, my problem is I voted for NAFTA. NAFTA in my state created more jobs than it lost jobs coming out of my state. And you can argue that on balance it probably created more American jobs than it lost. It goes to your point about there was dislocation. Some jobs got lost, some jobs got created. But again, NAFTA wasn't the problem. The problem became when you go beyond what these guys are doing, this administration, and its attitude about, and it's intellectually defensible attitude. The idea of the former Secretary of Treasury saying, look, it is good to go offshore. It's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. Well, it's good maybe for particular interest. It's very bad for a whole lot of other interests. So this isn't about saying we should not be investing in other parts of the world. This is not saying we shouldn't have open trade. It just says we should have free and fair trade. I mean, literally, fair trade. And that means that you get held to the same standard. And I would make another argument with you. My observation after 35 years in the Senate watching 7 presidents is countries behave in to the international norms in direct proportion to the willingness of the international community to hold them to those norms. We won't even, with regard to China, vote to censor them in the United Nations and Human Rights Committee because we're afraid to offend them. Now, what does that do? In my view, that promotes the mindset in China that they don't have to abide by these international.